Alright, so now we are going to solve the loops challenge in Python Hackerrank. So the task is the provided code stub reads an integer n from stdin. For all non-negative integers I smaller than n, print I square. Example, n equals 3. The list of non-negative integers that are less than n equals 3 is 0, 1, 2. Print the square of each number on a separate line. The result would be 0, 1, 4. So what we have to do is a loop. So the question is called loops. Now let's look at Google how loops are written in Python. Python for loop. So there's something like a for loop in Python, and we can look this up, and this is going to help us for the task. So the for loop says fruits. Okay, so here's a list: apple, banana, cherry, and then for x in fruits, print x. So what would it do here? It would take all the list elements like apple and print apple, then it will repeat the function and print banana, and then it will repeat and print cherry. So the x, it can be anything. You can also say for fruit in fruits. Now you say for x and x, for x and fruits. This is really just the name. X is not relevant. What is relevant is that you write in fruits, because then Python knows, okay, it is mentioned the fruits from the list in the line above, and we want to print all of them. And if we make like a print from x, that means that every element gets its own line, and we also need this here. We want a new line for every element. So we can take this code already and we can copy it and paste it here. So we're just gonna write, so you can just name it however you want. We just say for number in n. So n, it already knows that it means this n that we defined here before. And now we have to print something. So let's just print the number at first. Oh, of course we have to indent this one so it can work. So first we have the function for, and then we have to make an indentation. So we have to leave this gap, otherwise it will not work with the result. That's why we get the indentation error, expected an indented block. So let's run this again. Okay, int object is not iterable. Okay, because n is an integer, you cannot go through it like through a list. The input is 5, and the expected output would be 0, 1, 4, 9, 16. So the square from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, let's think about it again. Okay, we cannot go through it like a normal for loop, but what we can do is first we can check, is it really a positive number? So we make if n bigger than 0, then. So I realized the for loop is actually not the best use for this challenge. Why? Because for is better if we really have a list that we want to iterate through. In this time, as the error said, we don't have a list. We have an type integer. So for example, this input was just a 5, and so it cannot really go through it. So for doesn't really make sense to use the for loop. And for this reason, and because I think we need a loop, because the task is also called loops, I would suggest to use the while loop. Now what is a while loop? We can also look this up now. Python while loop. So the while loop can go through an element until a certain condition is met. While, for example, here we define an integer I equals 1, and while I is smaller than 6, we should print the number letter, the integer I, and then we make I plus equals 1, which means we iterate I and give it one more. In the first round, it's going to be equal to 1, and then we give it one more. So the next round I equals 2, and then it checks again, is 2 smaller than 6? Yes, it's true. Then you go again, and then you give I another one. So this plus equals is always I iterate this number one more up. So from 2, 3, from 3, 4, and so on. And then we go through the loop again. So now it is 3. Is 3 still smaller than 6? Yes, it is. And then you do it again until this condition is not true anymore. It is not true anymore when it is 6. So when 6 is smaller than 6 is tested, it fails. So it will not go in this loop again. And for that reason, I will say we define another integer, because we also want to give out an integer in this task. We want to give out all the numbers, all the non-negative integers that are less than n. Okay. And we want to start at 0. So let's define another variable for this integer. Let's define it here after the n. So the other variable, I would just call it also I, as we saw in the example, and then I will equal it to 0. Why to 0? Because 0 is the first number that we want to give out. We're going to make our check, is n bigger than 0, because it should be non-negative. We are going to delete this one with the for loop. And now we are going to print something. Now what do we want to print? We want to print the square from I. But first we want to make another check. Of course, we have to make the while loop with the check, because we don't want to print it forever. We only want to print it as long as the integers are less than n. So the n what we had before here. So while my integer that I just declared here as being 0 is smaller than n, I'm gonna do a certain action. So we have two conditions here that are being tested. First, is it bigger than 0? Second condition is the integer smaller than n. And now when both of these conditions are fulfilled, we want to print the integer, but we don't only want to print the integer, but we want to print the integer times the integer. So we want to print the integer square. In the first case, 0, it's always going to stay 0, because 0 times 0, of course, it's also 0. And then in the next cases, it will go up the square. So 1, of course, is the same, 1 times 1, and then 2 is going to be 4, and so on. And it should go until it is equal to n, and then it should stop, which is exactly what we want here. So let's see if we have the correct result now. Okay, so it exceeded the time limit and it always gave 0. So two problems that we have. So first problem, of course, we forgot something. What did we forget? We forgot to raise the integer. So in the while loop, here we see in the end, I plus equal 1. So we have to give the integer one more. So we say I plus equal 1. So we are always going to raise the integer. Now what did we do now? We created an infinite loop. The integer was 0 and it always stayed 0, because nowhere in the code I said that it should actually raise the 0 to the next higher number. That's what I'm going to do here now, is always should raise with one number in the end, and then it should check again. So now we also have a stop to this loop and will not go on forever. The program fortunately realized that it was going forever, and then it gave an error, so it didn't crash the program. So let's try this again now, and it works. So the n was 5 and we gave all the squares until 5. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's the solution.